Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Chaplain York's Philanthropy Briefing, focusing on saving our seas. We're very excited that we have three amazing charities that are dealing with this particular issue in very different ways. And we've also got wonderful representatives from around the world who are staying up at very strange hours of the day and night to have a word with you. These philanthropy briefings have been invented as an opportunity for you, wealth advisors, and your clients to be able to really understand sections of the charity world and what's going on with innovative and interesting charities working in that particular area. We have not shared your details with the charities, and we will not do so. So you can, participate in these with complete confidence that this is not a pitch event. This is really just an absolutely amazing opportunity to get behind what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what the needs are, etc. So we thank you very much for joining us. And I will now turn over to our amazing people working in this area. So first up is going to be Christopher LaFranchi from One Reef, who's joining us from San Diego. So Christopher, over to you.
So thank you very much for having me. My name is Chris LaFranchi. I'm the founder and CEO of One Reef. One Reef Worldwide Stewardship is our full name. I'm so thrilled to be able to share the important story of One Reef, which is partly my story, but increasingly the story of a growing international community of people who are partnering directly with Pacific Islanders to protect valuable coral reefs. The story is not just about protecting reefs, it's also about building communities. And one thing I really want to point out that's such a critical part of what we do is it's a story about recognizing and sort of activating and utilizing hundreds of years of traditional stewardship and traditional knowledge of these Pacific Islanders. I've grown up around the ocean in Southern California, and from a young age established a very strong relationship jumping in and out of the water, and went off to college and got a degree in marine biology, went to graduate school and switched to economics because I became very interested in biodiversity conservation and convinced that human behavior was really the way to address the problems we face in biodiversity conservation these days. I then spent about 20 years working and living in 5 or 6 different countries for large organizations like the World Bank and the World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, various aid groups. And I really enjoyed that work. I learned an incredible amount and kind of cut my teeth working with local and especially indigenous communities. But I became increasingly frustrated because I saw this enormous opportunity to solve big problems by working in a highly direct way over a long period of time with local communities. But I couldn't figure out a way to make that happen with my big jobs, my jobs working for large organizations. So at some point I left a perfectly good job to reinvent myself as a social entrepreneur and establish One Reef in 2012. And it's no coincidence that I decided to work in particular with Pacific Island communities. That's because of all the communities I work with, I found them, especially the communities in remote parts of the Pacific, as having very strong and intact connections with their traditional knowledge and their traditional ways of knowing and stewarding their environments. And I saw that as a critical part of the solutions we create at One Reef. To illustrate what we do in short order, I'm going to tell you a brief story about a recent event that occurred in the island nation of Palau at our very first site. So 10 years ago, I was invited by the Helen Reef Atoll community to negotiate a long-term agreement to partner with them. More recently, they were instrumental in preventing some major poaching by a Chinese vessel and 28 nationals there, and it was written up in The Guardian, so we're very proud of that. This is the team of conservation officers that were responsible for that work. And what I want to point out is it's led by a person who is coincidentally named Hercules, and he really lives up to his name here. I've known Hercules for the better part of 10 years and his community. And so when I heard this story, it really meant a lot to me. Hercules woke up one day with his team and realized that the area was being poached by a large Chinese vessel. So he got in his skiff and went out to to converse with the people on that vessel, who refused to move away and stop illegal fishing, and actually offered Hercules and his whole team cash bribes that equal more than their annual salaries. Hercules refused those bribes, to his credit, and he quietly went back to his ranger station. He picked up his satellite phone and he called the patrol vessel in the main islands of Palau, who then responded to his request to come and help him confiscate the illegal sea cucumbers that were being taken and confiscate the vessel and arrest the perpetrators. But what I really want to point out is that not only is it spectacular that these guys we partner with find no trouble in refusing bribes at such high levels, but it really illustrates for me just how important it is to partner with these Pacific Island communities, and that they really have something special that we need to build this kind of solution. Just to remind all of us, there is a big problem here to be solved, and there's a lot of urgency around it. Coral reefs in particular are so species rich. They support about 25% of all of the species in the ocean we know about. They exist on coral reefs. And unfortunately, we've lost about 50% of the world's coral reefs in the last 3 or 4 decades. So there's a great deal of urgency. With those losses are lost fisheries that are very important to communities, lost tourism revenues and jobs. Coral reefs protect shorelines from storm events. They provide so many benefits to humans. So they're just extremely important. And that's really where One Reef comes in. We see a wicked solution to this big problem in a nutshell by combining the science and technologies that all of us are more or less familiar with the kind of special sauce that I identify that communities in the Pacific have, at least some of them who have retained this local knowledge, and especially this sense of identity with place that makes it so easy for them to prioritize the protection of these places that we all value above bribes and everything else. So it's really a special opportunity when we partner with them. What you're looking at here in this image is a Pacific Islander from a team, one of many teams we've trained up to utilize a novel imaging technology that was developed by our close science partners at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. And just to give you a quick glimpse of what they do with this technology, as most of you probably know, coral reefs are struggling to adapt to a new climatic regime, to new climatic conditions. And as a social entrepreneur and working with my partners in the Pacific, we really want to make sure we're investing in the reefs with the greatest capacity to adapt to a new climate. So this is a time series of these images that these Pacific Islanders collect and they get processed at Scripps. What I want you to see here is in the middle in 2015. It starts in 2013 and ends in 2017. I want you to see the healthy corals in 2014 that become bleached in 2015 and then recover to a healthy state in 2016. This is exactly what we're looking for, and this is exactly what our Pacific Island partners manage around, and they couldn't do it without their local knowledge and dedication in combination with the kinds of technologies developed by our partners at Scripps. So how do we do all this over the long haul? Again, I point to these long-term relationships. And as an economist, I worked very hard to structure simple but very powerful time-bound agreements that we negotiate with communities that identify our shared goals, the kind of roles and responsibilities, where the greatest potential is for investments that are going to yield the greatest value add over time, and really working toward those goals and so on. We have negotiated successfully 12 of these agreements. They're for very large spatial areas in the Pacific. And we feel this model is proven very well after 10 years, as illustrated by the story that I just told you at Helen Reef. And we're looking to scale this up to 50 agreements, which we feel will give about coverage to about 1/3 of the intact coral reefs in the Micronesia region. And so that means going from about 20% of scale where we are now to 100% by 2030. And analogously, that means going from a current spatial scale of about 700,000 acres being protected by our community partners to close to 3 million acres. That means that there's, and we have communities sort of knocking at the door now who have seen successes at places like Helen Reef Atoll, who have very similar backgrounds and an affinity for their place and cultural attributes and or willingness to adopt new technology and skills. So there's an enormous potential to scale this up, and really we identified in various places a total of at least 2 million acres of rich reef that still need protecting. The man in this picture is a chief of a different coral atoll in the Pohnpei region, and he's a big fan of scaling up and showing others his success. So how do we do this at One Reef? That's where you guys come in, because again, the Pacific Islanders are there, they've been there, they have the local knowledge generated over generations. We have scientists who've developed useful tools. What we need is to build the international community of people to partner directly with them. And the best way we find to do this is to actually take people out on expeditions with us and give them this immersive experience that involves diving with scientists, meeting local leaders, going out with community members, and actually seeing and believing how things work for them, hearing from them directly. It's a memorable experience. People talk about it 5 or 8 years after their expedition. It's also kind of a path for people. I really observe people changing their worldviews after these immersive experiences. It's really wonderful for me to watch. It's one of the best parts of my job. In this picture, you're seeing what's called a sakau ceremony. You probably have heard of this, but it's better known as kava. But this is in Micronesia, where they call it sakau, and it's part of a ceremony to initiate a new turtle sanctuary that this community is putting together. In addition to meeting communities, seeing how everything works, understanding the culture better, we also have great relationships with the presidents of all the countries in Micronesia. And so part of our expeditions also involve working with high-level leadership to understand how they're thinking about supporting the community-based work we do, to understand more about the policy framework and other things that matter a lot. A lot of our financing is through public-private partnerships. So for example, in Palau, when we have expeditions, we closely engage with the president. I'm about out of time. I want to be respectful to my co-presenters and end here. But I just really want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing with you. I'm going to put my contact information here, and if anyone is interested in talking further about expeditions or other aspects of One Reef, we would love to connect with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for that. And there will be time, everyone, to ask questions at the end of the presentations. So fascinating what you're doing. Let me next introduce Peter Hammerstedt, who is actually in Latin America at the moment. Peter's with Sea Shepherd, and he's going to tell us about how they're approaching this absolutely crucial world need. Peter, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to be able to present the work that Sea Shepherd's doing. I'd like to start by showing a quick video that highlights the work we're doing in West Africa, and then explain a little bit as to how we ended up there.
The oceans are dying in our time. By 2047, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Trawlers are going up and down these waters, cleaning out the oceans, and those fish are going to wealthy countries. But here at Sea Shepherd, particularly out here on these campaigns, we say, yes, a catastrophe is coming, but we will stop it. I'm in West Africa, on the West African coast, on the Bob Barker ship, with a wonderful Sea Shepherd crew. When there is a problem, the Sea Shepherd ships are the first to respond, because they have a team of young, energetic, smart, courageous young people willing to put themselves on the line to protect the most precious of all things. So that is why I support Sea Shepherd so strongly. Part of this trip has opened my eyes to another need. We need our campaigns to be increased. So I welcome you all to a battle in a war that decency cannot afford to lose.
That was my dear friend Philip Wallen. He's the former vice president of Citibank. He's been a longtime supporter of Sea Shepherd, and I had the great privilege of sailing with him in the Gambia last year. 6 years ago, I was standing on the bridge of my ship, about 80 nautical miles southwest of the small island state of Sao Tome and Principe in the Gulf of Guinea, where my crew and I were watching a ship that we had chased for 110 days, covering 3 oceans and 11,000 nautical miles, sink right before our eyes. This vessel, named Thunder, was on an Interpol Purple Notice list. It was internationally blacklisted. It was the subject of a number of international conferences on fisheries crime. And in 10 years, it had made an illicit profit of $60 million poaching Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish down in the Southern Ocean. It had evaded justice for over a decade by changing its name and changing its flag and color scheme constantly. And so Sea Shepherd had the idea that we would go and track down this notorious poaching vessel. The idea was to find them somewhere in the most remote area of water in the world, the Banzari Bank, the shadowlands of the Southern Ocean, 2 weeks sailing from the nearest port. And if, using my vessel, the Bob Barker, if we could find this vessel, then we could do a citizen's arrest of sorts. If there was a vessel following the Thunder, then they couldn't change their name, they couldn't change their flag, they couldn't repaint. We were going to be a veritable loud hailer, exclaiming to the world, this is where this illegal fishing vessel is. We were going to light up their shadowy business to law enforcement, saying, someone somewhere, please come and arrest this ship. Took us about 2 days in the heavy fog off the frozen continent to find the Thunder, a ship that had not been seen by international law enforcement for over 2-3 years. And that would start what, unbeknownst to us, what would become the longest maritime pursuit in history. The first thing that the Thunder tried to do was to lose us in the heavy ice flows that surround the Antarctic, but I was able to keep up with them by following in the warm line that the wake of their ship drew through the ice flows. They then tried to lose us in the heavy weather that the Southern Oceans are known for. 6, 7, 8 meter seas beat and battered my vessel as we pursued them north to warmer waters. Off the coast of South Africa, they simply drifted for about 2 months, trying to outlast us and test our patience. And finally, when they started motoring again, after 110 days, they ended up in the Gulf of Guinea. And unable to shake us, their pursuers, the captain of the Thunder decided to sink his own ship in an ill-fated bid to destroy the evidence on board. My crew and I rescued the 40 crew of the Thunder. We transferred them over to the nearest port of call, which was Sao Tome and Principe. But I remember standing on the bridge of my ship and thinking, why, out of all the places on this chase that the Thunder captain could have sunk his own vessel, why did he choose the Gulf of Guinea? And as we turned him and the rescued crew over to the Sao Tome Coast Guard, as they came out to meet us in their small riverine patrol boats with a range of about 20 meters, which was a quarter or that had a range of about 20 nautical miles, a quarter of the distance to where the Thunder ultimately sank, I realized that the captain of the Thunder knew that no Coast Guard or Navy was going to come and bring submersible pumps on board and keep his ship afloat. He knew that his ship would sink. And ultimately, the reason why the captain of the Thunder decided to sink his ship in the Gulf of Guinea is the same reason why this is a region that has illegal fishing, transshipment, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and other crimes, namely that there's inadequate monitoring, control, and surveillance. Before the chase of the Thunder, I didn't really know that much about the fishing problem. I'd spent most of my life focused on the issue of whaling, but 110 days of pursuit gives you a lot of time to research the issues. And I learned that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimate that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. And exacerbating that problem is the fact that 20% of the global catch of fish is caught through illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. In the waters of West Africa, that number can be as close to 40 or 50%, meaning that 1 out of 2 fish could actually be caught by these illegal operators. Also, 90% of the world's fish is actually caught in the waters of countries. Fish congregate around fish mounds and continental shelves, and areas close to the coastline, areas that are within national jurisdiction. So if we want to deal with the issue of overfishing, and we know that 1 out of fish caught is caught illegally, then if we're going to turn this tide of destruction, then surely we should start with the types of fishing activity that we already have the laws on our place to deal with. What Sea Shepherd does is we intervene when governments lack either the political will or the economic means, or sometimes the jurisdiction to enforce international conservation law or national fisheries regulations. And as I was chasing the thunder up the coast of West Africa, I was in touch with a number of governments asking if any of them could intervene and take over this citizen's arrest and bring the thunder into port to face justice. And the only country that got back to me was the small central West African country of Gabon. Gabon is one of the richest tuna fisheries in the Atlantic and therefore in the world. And yet, because the economic resources of the country are stretched, they don't have a vessel asset that can cover the entirety of their waters. 3 months after the thunder sank, I traveled to Gabon, and we signed the first of what would become many shipwrighter agreements with the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Fisheries. And the agreement is basically that Sea Shepherd provides a vessel, a 50-meter vessel that serves as a civilian offshore patrol vessel, the operating crew to run the ship, and the fuel to run the vessel. And in return, our partner country provides the law enforcement agents with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels. Since that partnership started in 2016, we've assisted the Gabonese government to arrest 12 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crimes. 3 years ago, Gabon established the largest network of marine protected areas in Africa, covering 26% of their waters. And we're now working with the Gabonese government to establish Africa's first shark sanctuary. Looking at the success in Gabon, we were invited to Liberia to set up a similar situation. Liberia has a big artisanal fishing community. For that reason, the government of Liberia has established a 6 nautical mile inshore exclusion zone that's reserved for the artisanal and subsistence fishing communities. Industrial fishing is simply not allowed there. And yet every single night, industrial fishing vessels were making incursions. They were running over artisanal nets, they were running over canoes, people were even drowning at sea. And the Liberian Coast Guard did not have the vessel assets that could cover the entirety of their waters. In the 3 years that we've been working in Liberia, we've assisted the Liberian Coast Guard to arrest 15 vessels for illegal fishing. And in the past year of patrols in Liberia, we haven't encountered any illegal fishing activity at all. One of the vessels that was arrested was a ship called the Libico II. This was a vessel that was licensed for a tuna fishery using longline fishing gear. But once the Liberian Coast Guard came on board, supported and assisted by Sea Shepherd, we discovered that this vessel was using deep sea gill nets, essentially invisible curtains of death, to catch deep sea sharks to produce shark liver oil. And to produce just the 50 tons of shark liver oil that they were delivering ashore every 3 weeks took the lives of 66,000 deep sea sharks. The Libico II was arrested by the Liberian Coast Guard, supported by Sea Shepherd. It spent 6 months in detention before being fined. And every day that the vessel spent detained was sharks saved. In the 6 months of its detention, that was 250,000 sharks that were not killed. And I think there's very few organizations other than Sea Shepherd that can deliver those kind of results, where in exchange for your generous donation, keeping our ships at sea, keeping our vessels afloat, we're able to transfer those donations into lives saved. Since the partnership with Gabon and Liberia, we've expanded to other countries in Africa, including Namibia, Tanzania, Benin, Sierra Leone, the Gambia. We've created a model that we think really, really works. And what appeals to me about these campaigns is that there's something in them that appeals to anybody. If animal rights or animal welfare is something that you're passionate about, then every single day one of these illegal fishing vessels is detained in port, that's an illegal slaughterhouse shut down. It's tens of thousands of marine creatures saved. If your passion is conservation and marine parks, then Sea Shepherd's activities is what allows marine parks to not just be paper tigers. We give law enforcement agents the bite to enforce the marine park regulations that so many groups work tirelessly to put in place. And if your passion is social justice, then in many cases, we're the only line of defense preventing some of the wealthiest fishing companies from some of the wealthiest countries in the world from stealing from some of the world's poorest people. What we're looking at doing now is expanding to other countries in West Africa so we can do regional patrols, having law enforcement agents from several countries on board our ship at once, allowing our patrols to move fluidly across borders, increasing our patrolling footprint. And we're also looking to export this model of public-private partnerships to other areas of the world, including Latin America and the South Pacific. But that's something that we can really only do thanks to donations from the public and foundations and support. So thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to talk about the work that we've been doing in the field.
Thank you, Peter. I think one thing that's emerging is the importance of public-private partnerships between your organizations and the local people you work with. But the other thing that I think I will remember is just the thought of you chasing in your boat, in your ship, the thunder around the world and what that might actually feel like in real time, rather than on a monopoly board or on a board as you know, people who aren't involved in it might think of it. So thank you very much for that. And let me finally introduce to you Andy Boole from Sea Life Trust, who also has a really interesting, different view of what they've been doing with this particular area. Andy, over to you.
So hello everyone, and thanks for your time today. So I'm Andy Boole and I'm the head of the Sea Life Trust, a global charity that aims to make a positive difference for ocean habitat and marine wildlife across the world. Our vision is a world where our seas are properly protected, healthy and full of life. I just wanted to talk first, you know, you've seen from Christopher and Peter's presentations, you know, our oceans face a number of challenges: the impacts of climate change, lack of protection from harmful activity, and also pollution. So they're the challenges. But I think, you know, what I want everybody to take away from today is that we can make a difference to this. And you've seen from Peter and Christopher, you know, there are organisations making a difference. We aim to as well. But we must never feel that we can't make a difference to these challenges and the issues that the oceans face at the moment. That's what kind of keeps me going in my role leading the Sea Life Trust. So what do we do? The Sea Life Trust is a global charity focused on making a positive difference to ocean wildlife and habitat across the world. And we do that in three main ways where we think we can make that practical difference. And the first way is through campaigning. And that's about either changing legislation or behaviour change or taking practical action. And some things we've done in the past, we've worked with other NGOs and partnered with other NGOs and the public to see new marine protected areas created across the world through our campaigns. We've challenged EU laws that helped prop up the whaling industry. We've challenged laws on limits of catch of sharks within the EU as well, in partnership with organisations. And changing legislation in that way is one of the ways we can make a difference. We've also campaigned and worked to educate people to help them change their behaviour as well. So we've campaigned on plastic and plastic use across the world over the last few years, giving people simple solutions to reduce their single-use plastic use and seeking to encourage people to make behaviour change. But we also take practical action, and we ran our first global beach clean in 2019. We had 40 cleanups around the world. We weren't able to run it again last year for obvious reasons, but we are going to run it again this year in July. And that's about taking practical action to remove harmful pollution, plastic pollution in particular, from the oceans, and people volunteering to support us in doing that. So that's one of the ways we work. The second is by using the funds we raise across the world to fund practical projects that make a difference. And we've funded projects that have helped to protect sea turtle nesting beaches. For example, in East Timor, we've protected grey nurse shark habitat off the coast of Australia. We've removed ghost nets, discarded fishing nets from the oceans in the Maldives, and also from around the UK, actually. And we also like to fund projects that make a practical difference or trial new ways of dealing with some of these issues. And a project we're really excited by that we funded is in the Pacific off the coast of Peru, where we've worked with a local NGO to trial the use of LED lights in gill nets there as a means of reducing bycatch, accidental capture of sea turtles and marine mammals and seabirds actually in those nets. And what we've seen initially is a huge reduction in that accidental capture there. So aiming to make a positive difference through using our funding to support projects like that. And then last but not least is through marine life sanctuaries. And we have 2 sanctuaries at the moment. And we work through those sanctuaries really to make a difference to individual animals and their lives. We aim to do research through those sanctuaries as well that help to protect wild populations or help us learn more about those animals. And we also educate our visitors to those sanctuaries about how they can help protect these animals in the wild. And the 2 sanctuaries we have, I'd just like to talk briefly about those at the moment. We have a seal sanctuary down in the southwest of the UK in Cornwall, a beautiful place called Gweek on the Helford Estuary. And the purpose of that sanctuary is to rescue, rehabilitate and release sick or injured seal pups that are found around the Cornwall coastline, the Cornish coastline. And we rescue some and release somewhere between 70 and 80 seal pups every year. You know, sometimes those pups are ill or injured due to natural circumstances, but equally we're seeing more now, more seal pups coming to us due to entanglement issues. So images like this one here of a seal pup entangled in a fishing net. We aim to, and we've got pretty good over the years actually, rehabilitating these animals and releasing them back into the wild. But for those animals who are too ill or have long-term conditions that mean they can't be released back into the wild because they wouldn't survive, we provide a permanent home for those animals as well. And then we have visitors to that sanctuary, and we aim to educate those visitors about how they can protect these animals in the wild. But equally, we use our sanctuary as a means for conservation outreach and education in the area as well, educating young people, bringing volunteers in to help us and undertaking research projects there. Excitingly, we're also part under the research banner this year of a reintroduction project for beavers here in the UK. So you may have seen beavers are really in the news at the moment. There are lots of similar projects across the UK actually. But we're proud to have these two beavers now who are playing a really important role for us in understanding the impact and the positive impact they have on the natural environment and in particular the oceans and the estuary that we're sat beside, because they're part of a research program for us. We're going to track over time how the dams they build and the pools they create help to actually deal with pollution from agricultural runoff before creek water ends up in the estuary and in our oceans. And we're tracking that at the moment, but exciting to see how beavers who were native to the UK up to about 400 years ago when they were hunted to extinction, how if they were brought back and reintroduced, they could have a positive impact, not only on their local environment, but also on oceans too. And then our second sanctuary is a world first, our beluga whale sanctuary in Iceland. And it's set in a beautiful bay on an island called Vestmannaeyjar off the south coast of Iceland. And our vision with our beluga whale sanctuary is to provide a more natural home for beluga whales coming from an aquarium or water park background. So these whales, who we hope will come to the sanctuary, are at the moment in water parks, entertaining the public, taking part in shows every day. We know that's not great for these animals' welfare. And we have two beautiful beluga whales, little white and little grey, who came from Shanghai in China to Iceland a couple of years ago to live the rest of their life out in this beautiful bay in a more natural setting. And little white and little grey are really ambassadors for the 300 other beluga whales in captivity across the world. We hope by showing that this is better for their welfare and that they can thrive in an environment like this, that other water parks and aquariums will want to provide a different way of caring for the cetaceans in their care. And then more widely, there are 3,000 whales and dolphins in captivity across the world. We hope that by leading the way in the way we are, other cetaceans, whales and dolphins will have the opportunity to move into a sanctuary environment. The aims of this sanctuary are to enhance the welfare of its residents. We have space in this bay for up to 10 whales at the moment, and we hope more will join little white and little grey. We aim to advance knowledge through research and education, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, and then also to support protection of wild populations. So funds we raise through the sanctuary and through visitors to the sanctuary, we aim to put back into protecting wild populations of whales. So little white and little grey moved out into the bay last year, and they've been in captivity. They're about 13 years old. They've been in captivity since they were very young. We think they were caught when they were somewhere between 1 and 2 years old from the wild, so barely weaned from their mother at that point. So they've been in human care all their lives. So a big focus of our work at the moment is actually helping little white and little grey settle into this new environment where they're experiencing things they haven't seen before or for a very long time. Sunlight, rain on their backs, all of the flora and fauna they can interact with in the bay that they're in there. And we're adapting in the same way that they are actually, and learning a lot from what they're going through and how they're adapting, which will not only help them, but also other whales who come to this sanctuary. And a key part of that, and making the argument for these sanctuaries being an alternative and a viable alternative for looking after these cetaceans in human care, is actually tracking the welfare benefits that come from moving a whale from a blue pool indoors into a more natural environment. And we're conducting an ongoing research study alongside little white and little grey's journey, which is tracking their welfare throughout this process, with the aim that we'll have data to show to people who have beluga whales and other cetaceans in their care that shows this is better for them. And we're working at the moment to identify other belugas actually who could be candidates to come and join little white and little grey in the sanctuary. So other belugas who will hopefully come from blue pools. And back to the issue of climate change here as well. We're also doing some research at the moment in partnership with Whale and Dolphin Conservation on little white and little grey and the carbon benefit of putting whales back into the sea. You know, we know whales have a carbon benefit. They sequester carbon in the oceans. So whilst little white and little grey might not make a huge impact on the bigger picture, you know, if you could see hundreds of whales or thousands of whales moving back into the ocean from indoor pools, you know, collectively there is a benefit there that could help to positively impact climate change. The other key part of our sanctuary in Iceland is the island the sanctuary is on is home to the largest breeding colony of Atlantic puffins. And we have a puffin hospital and rescue centre within our sanctuary that helps to look after sick or injured puffins and pufflings, best word in the world, young puffins who need help for one reason or another. You know, and we saw 250 injured or oiled birds last year, and took them through the hospital, and we just released the last batch of them last week, actually, 16 or so birds. We couldn't hope to do what we do to make a practical difference without collaboration or support from others, and I just wanted to really say thank you here to those of you listening, but also to our existing supporters, our ambassadors and patrons, who help amplify the messaging around our work and our communications, our sanctuary visitors who support our work by visiting our sanctuaries, our supporters across the globe, and then companies and foundations that we work with too. Thank you very much for listening.
Andy, thank you very much. Really interesting. Well, thank you to all three of you. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. But I have a question for each of you, and that is, looking at the amazing work you do you feel that, have we reached a peak where we are getting better in how we deal with the seas, with the sea life, etc., or are we still getting worse in terms of how the world is handling this particular problem? Christopher, do you want to have a go at that? Are we peaking bad or getting better?
Well, if you ask an economist that kind of question, ooh, that's a complicated one. Let me just simplify it, at least to what I see in my day-to-day work life. I would say the communities that we work with and their host governments have generally been on a great trajectory of improving their knowledge base and their capacity to prevent illegal fishing and see their best reefs adapt to climate change and measure those things. Just as one anecdote to kind of illustrate this, when I first started working in Palau more than 10 years ago, it was unthinkable that a president of that country would reach out to Xi Jinping in China and say, look, there's somebody from your country has been poaching our area. We would like to reach out and extend ourselves. We think we should work together to prevent this from happening. I think that would have been a big surprise 10 years ago. It's not a big surprise now. Not that the Palau president got a big response from Xi Jinping, but I think it's just illustrative of how things are improving in the long run.
Peter?
I think we're seeing greater awareness for ocean conservation issues, and that's a positive thing. And there's a growing movement to establish more marine protected areas. We all understand the function of national parks on land, but very few parts of the oceanic environment are protected, and very few of the areas that are protected are strictly no-take fishing zones. And even if they are no-take fishing zones, then there are issues with enforcement capacity to actually enforce the laws that are there. I think what's inspiring to me is that it can be a bit overwhelming to think, how are we going to save the oceans? But what we have to save are critical areas of biodiversity, islands of biodiversity. And I think we are doing that. We're identifying these areas where we can draw our lines in the sand, or draw our lines in the sea, rather, the places where we can dig in our trenches and fortify our positions. And when we can do that, biodiversity has the opportunity to come back in a big way. We've seen that in Gabon, we've seen that in Liberia, and the places where we can have a patrolling presence. The local fishing communities are seeing fish come back in a big way. I've met local fishermen in Tanzania, guys who are 60, 70 years old, who are now catching tuna that are bigger than their parents remember. And so there is an opportunity there to really turn the tide. And I think countries can really set an example for other countries to model. And I think most importantly, it's important to remember that throughout human history, it's individuals and small groups of passionate and compassionate people that really drive governmental change. And that's why it's really important for funders to contribute to civil society organizations, because we really set the political agenda that governments can later follow.
Thank you. Andy?
I think
Up or down?
Peter's point about it being overwhelming is an important one for me. Awareness is increasing, and that's great. But I think what what we can't lose sight of and shouldn't lose sight of, and hopefully you've seen from the three of us today, we can make a difference, and nobody should ever feel they can't. You know, and you can make a difference in different ways. But look for organisations or places where you can support people who are making a difference. That's how we're going to see a more positive future. Don't lose hope. Lots of things going on. Don't be overwhelmed. Look for ways to support projects that are actually making that difference.
Stay on for a second, Andy. So I've got a question here that I'd like you all to respond to, which is, does high-profile campaigns such as the one against plastics in the sea, which we obviously all support and appreciate, but does that make your jobs harder in terms of people thinking about some of the other issues that are going on with the seas? Is it distracting your is something like that, which is such a huge high-profile thing, is it really making it harder for you to get your messages out in terms of the specific things that you're doing?
I don't think so. I think it gives you an opportunity to talk about wider issues. As awareness increases, those sorts of campaigns have a really important part to play in raising awareness. And I think it is, for me, the ability they give for us to talk about other things that need to be done to help protect the oceans. So I think by and large they're positive. Those campaigns need to have an outcome and an action, either for individuals or governments. That would be my main point, because I think that's how difference comes from those.
Thank you. Peter?
I think the plastic campaigns are great, because the reality is that the ocean conservation issues exist because the oceans are out of sight and out of mind. And when people make lifestyle choices that are for the betterment of the ocean, then they're taking individual responsibility, and we need to see a lot more individual responsibility to taken. I mentioned the case of the Libico 2 in my presentation, this vessel that was killing deep sea sharks to produce shark liver oil. This was a vessel that in the 1990s was part of a fleet of 50 vessels that was fishing for deep sea sharks in the North Atlantic. And each one of these vessels in a 2-month fishing expedition was losing about 30 kilometers of gill net as ghost net every 2 months. So that's ghost net is net that will continue to drift and kill until it finally washes ashore somewhere. 30 kilometers of gill net times 50 ships is 1,500 kilometers of gill net lost at sea as ghost net every 2 months by just this fleet of 50 vessels. And that's the equivalent of 750 tons of marine plastic pollution in the form of ghost nets every single month. So it's great that people are making conscious decisions when they go to restaurants, and there's a big movement for people to say no to plastic straws, and I think that's really important. But we also have to realize that other lifestyle choices we make have an impact as well. And overfishing is one of the biggest challenges that we have to face facing the oceans. And I didn't really have a chance to touch on climate, but if we're looking at the Gulf of Guinea, it's estimated that off the coast of Nigeria, where people are dependent on the fisheries for food security, due to climate change alone, fish populations are likely to fall by 90% by 2100. So we're at this critical junction where we really need to build ecological resilience in the sea to last climate change, let alone overfishing. So I think issues like plastic awareness are great as an introduction to ocean conservation. But again, that individual responsibility needs to manifest in a lot more ways. And that includes supporting organizations like Christopher's, like Andy's, and like mine.
Peter, as long as I've got you, I've got a question here. It says, has the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy made a big difference to your campaign?
Seaspiracy has been great in that, again, it gets people thinking about oceans. And the French oceanographer and explorer Jacques Cousteau said in the 1970s, the oceans are dying in our time. And for those of us who spend as much time at sea as I do, we can testify to that. We are seeing the steady diminishment of our oceans. But what sets the political agenda often is the media agenda. Politicians pay attention to what's in the news because they know that what's on the news is what their voters are discussing around the dinner table. And one of the things that is really effective with civil society campaigning is that we are able to get these issues in the news, which gets politicians to have to act on it. Seaspiracy on Netflix is a great example of that.
Thank you. Chris, is it positive or negative news?
I think the plastics is on balance been very positive for us. We have, I can think of a couple of examples of supporters, longstanding supporters of ours that just became really concerned about plastics while on vacation. And then that sort of set them on a path to support various charities, they're ocean lovers, and then discovered us as after kind of the gateway of plastics and ocean plastics, and thinking more deeply about how this was affecting the ocean and nearshore reefs, and discovered us. So for us, it's been helpful and we find synergy with those groups.
If I can hold you for one last second, then one last takeaway. We've got just a minute or two each of just one last thing you'd like people to leave with a thought. Christopher, and thank you for staying awake.
Of course. The last takeaway is I want people to understand that there's this enormous opportunity to work with groups of humans who share our goals for maintaining healthy oceans or reviving oceans to make them healthier. We just need to find great ways to connect with them and work with them. And those are the example is for us, these Pacific Islanders who know so much and are so willing to work with us. We just need to make that connection.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for being awake in the middle of the night.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I think ultimately these ocean problems don't go away by us wishing them away or hoping they go away or expecting governments to solve all of our problems. Our own individual action is required. And I've had the great privilege of spending the last 19 years of my life, my entire adult life, I've spent at sea working with Sea Shepherd. And I get to go to bed every single night knowing that because this small group of passionate and compassionate people, because this small group intervened, there's marine wildlife swimming free right here and right now. And that gives me hope. And I'm just grateful for the supporters that we have, both old and hopefully new, that allow my crew and I to be on the front lines every single day protecting marine wildlife.
Peter, thank you. Andy?
What I've said before, really, you can make a difference. I think that's what I want people to take away. It can be overwhelming, all of these issues, but there are practical ways of making a difference, and you can help make that difference.
Well, on behalf of Chapel in York and our foundations in the Netherlands and Switzerland and the UK, who are the hosts of this event, we'd like to thank all of our participants for being here and for listening and sharing this with us. Thank you so much to those of you who have given your time, your sleep, for telling us about this particular area. And I hope that those of you that have come will come to future philanthropy briefings. And thank you all very much for giving up your time and your energy for this really important and really fascinating information. Thank you all, and have a good day, night, and evening.
Thank you, Nancy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.